Hazard identification and risk management. Purpose: to ensure that there is a formal process for hazard identification, risk assessment, and control to effectively manage hazards that may occur within the workplace of Plaas Incorporated. The hazard identification process should be used for routine and non-routine activities, as well as new processes, changes in operation, products or services as applicable. This procedure is for general OHS hazards and risk. It is not to be used for scientific activities in laboratories and associated facilities. The laboratory risk assessment form is to be used for these situations. Preamble. Employers have obligations under the Occupation Health and Safety Regulation 2001 to identify any foreseeable hazards that may arise in the workplace and to assess the risk of harm arising from the identified hazards. There are three main reasons for this process. 1, out of concern for the health and safety of staff, students, contractors, and visitors. 2, it makes good business sense and is cost effective. 3, so that the company's duty of care to its employees, customers, contractors, students, and visitors can be undertaken, and so health and safety legal requirements can be met. 2.2. Workplace hazard identification, assessment, and control are an ongoing process. It should be undertaken at various times, including 1, if it has not been done before. 2, when a hazard has been identified. 3, when a change to the workplace occurs. 4, after an incident, accident, or workplace illness. 5, at regularly scheduled times appropriate to the workplace. The following procedure for risk management involving hazard identification, risk assessment, and control is a practical guide for helping make all workplaces safe for staff, students, contractors, and visitors. It will help both management and employees through consultation to comply with the health and safety regulations set by the Work Cover Regulatory Authority. These regulations require employers to identify, assess, fix, and record all hazards and risks in their workplace. The procedure will assist in 1, finding hazards in the workplace. 2, assessing the risks that may result because of the hazards. 3, deciding on control measures to prevent or minimize the levels of the risks. 4, fixing the problem using control measures. 5, monitoring and reviewing the effectiveness of the measures. Definitions. Hazard: anything, example, condition, situation, practice, behavior, that has the potential to cause harm, including injury, disease, death, environmental or property and equipment damage. Hazard identification. This is the process of examining each work area and work task for the purpose of identifying all the hazards which are inherent in the job. Work areas include, but are not limited to, machine workshops, laboratories, office areas, agriculture and horticultural environments, stores and transport, maintenance and grounds, reprographics and lecture theaters, and teaching spaces. Tasks can include, but may not be limited to, using screen-based equipment, audio and visual equipment, industrial equipment, hazardous substances and/or dangerous goods, teaching and dealing with people, driving a vehicle, dealing with emergency situations, construction. The likelihood risk, the likelihood of probability that a hazardous event with a given outcome or consequence will occur. Risk assessment is defined as the process of assessing the risks associated with each of the hazards identified, so that appropriate control measures can be implemented based on the probability, i.e. likelihood that harm, injury, or ill health may occur, and how severe the consequences of exposure might be. Risk of control. This is the process of identifying and implementing the most cost-effective risk control measures having regard to the control principle and legislative provisions. Monitoring and review. This involves ongoing monitoring of the hazards identified, risk assessment and risk control passes, and reviewing them to make sure that they are working effectively. Number 4, aim. Plaas Incorporated is committed to providing and implementing a procedure to cover both systematic and incidental identification, assessment, and control of all workplace hazards so that it meets its statutory occupational health and safety obligations. Number 5, responsibilities. It is the responsibility of all managers and supervisors to ensure that this policy is fully implemented in their area of control and to consult with staff as part of the undertaking, the hazard identification, risk assessment, and control process. It is the responsibility of staff and employees to cooperate and comply with this policy. Risk assessment procedure. Number 6. The risk assessment procedure can best be illustrated in the following way. Number 1, identify the hazard. Number 2, assess the risk. Number 3, evaluate the existing controls. Number 4, implement additional risk controls. Number 5, monitor and review. Identify the hazard. Health and safety legislation requires that employers, in consultation with employees, identify all potentially hazardous situations which could result in any person in the workplace being harmed. The hazard identification process requires that 1. Past incidents, accidents be examined to see what happened and whether the incident, accident could happen again. 2. Employees be consulted to find out what they consider are safety issues. Example, how could an employee be exposed to this hazard? 3. Work areas or work sites be examined to find out what is happening now. 4. Information about equipment, example, plant or operating instructions, and material safety data sheets be reviewed to see what is said about safety precautions. 5. Some creative thinking about what could go wrong, take place, i.e. what hazardous event could take place here. 6.22. At Plaas Incorporated, any hazard which is identified by this process should be recorded by staff on the risk assessment and control sheet. Step 2. Assess the risk. Once a hazard has been identified, an employer is required, in consultation with employees or their representative, to determine how likely it is that someone could be harmed by the hazard and what the consequence of the resulting injury or illness could be. This should include 1. Identify factors that may be contributing to the risk. 2. Review health and safety information that is reasonably available from an authoritative source and is relevant to the particular hazard. 3. Evaluate the likelihood of an injury occurring and the likely severity of an injury or illness that may occur. 4. Identify the actions necessary to eliminate or control the risk. And 5. Identify records that it is necessary to keep to ensure that the risks are eliminated or controlled. Other risk factors should be identified that may contribute to the risk, including 6. The work premises and working environment, including their layout and conditions. 7. The capability, skill, experience, and age of people ordinarily undertaking work. 8. The system of the work being used. And 9. The range of reasonably foreseeable conditions. The process of assessing the risk is undertaken by reviewing any available information about the hazard, example, a law, regulation, industry code or practice, guidance material about the hazard, and by using your personal work experience about what sort of accident or illness the hazard could create and how likely this would be to happen. When determining how likely that it is a person could be exposed to a hazard or hazardous event, consideration needs to be given to those exposure factors. Whether there are any risk factors that increase the likelihood exposure. How often is the person exposed? Frequency. How long is the person exposed? Duration. How many people are exposed? The likely dose to which the person is exposed. Any legislative or recommended exposure levels required by statutory authorities. At Plaas Incorporated, we require managers and supervisors to identify hazards, assess the risk of the accident or illness which has occurred, and set priority for corrective action by using a clearly laid out process. This process is as follows. 1. Identify hazards that are placed on the risk assessment and control form. 2. A risk category table is then used to categorize the type of risk to the institution. 3. The risk rating matrix is used to assess the likelihood and the severity or consequences of each hazard and to give it a risk rating. Step 3. Evaluation of existing risk controls. Once a risk rating is determined, each hazard must have its existing risk control measures evaluated using the Evaluation of Control Effectiveness table. This allows for determination of any additional requirement necessary. Evaluation of Control Effectiveness table. Implement additional risk controls. Having identified the hazards in your workplace, assessed their risk, and reviewed the existing controls, all hazards must be managed before people are hurt, become ill, or there is damage to the plant, property, or the environment. All hazards that have been assessed should be dealt with in an order of priority in one or more of the following hierarchy of controls. Number 1, eliminate the hazard, remove it from the workplace. Number 2, substitute the hazard. Substitute a substance, method, or material to reduce the risk of the hazard. Number 3, isolate or enclose the hazard. Separate the hazard from the workplace, example, in a chemical storeroom or laboratory, kept locked except to an authorized person. Lockout procedures on faulty equipment. Appropriate guarding for machinery. Use engineering solutions. Modify existing machinery or plant, or purchase different machinery or plant. 5. Administrative procedures. Develop work methods to reduce the conditions of risk. Example, A. Written safe operating procedures. B. Job rotation to restrict hours worked on difficult jobs. C. Staff trained in the correct operating procedures. 6. Use personal protective equipment, PPE, and training in its use. Employees will be trained in the hazard identification process, including the use and care of proper PPE. This should only be used as a last resort to deal with the hazard, where the hazard cannot be removed or reduced by any other means. For example, A. Handling of chemicals, gloves, safety glasses, aprons. B. Protecting eyes from flying particles. C. Protecting feet, safety boots. Each measure must have a designated person and date assigned for the implementation of controls. This ensures that all required safety measures will be completed. Step 5. Monitor and review. Hazard identification, risk assessment, and control is an ongoing process. Therefore, regularly review the effectiveness of your hazard assessment and control measures. Make sure that you undertake a hazard and risk assessment when there is a change to the workplace, including when work systems, tools, machinery, or equipment change. Provide additional supervision when new employees with reduced skill levels or knowledge are introduced to the workplace.